The term fascist and fascism sure does seem to get thrown around a lot these days. But the thing is, words have meaning, and not everything that you don't like is fascism. There are lots of things that I don't like, but not all of them are fascism. So I thought today we'd take a look at what this word means, and especially one author's checklist, really, for fascism. My name is Stefan Kesting. I've been in the martial arts for 43 years. I'm a fourth degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I'm part of a collective of black belts, the Fighting Matters Collective, who are trying to talk about the fascistic tendencies in the martial arts and to speak out against how large portions of the combat sports community, the MMA community, and the jiu-jitsu community seem to be veering off into wild conspiracy land and into an embrace of far right-wing fascism. So fascism is a form of authoritarianism. Fascism doesn't necessarily mean Nazism. Nazism was a form of fascism, but there were other types of fascism. In the 1920s and 1930s, you had Italian fascism. After World War II, you had Spanish fascism. Right now, you could make an argument that you have Hungarian fascism. Now, I am most familiar with the German example. My dad was German. My grandfather participated in the wrong side of World War II. And this is the time in history that I've done most reading about and most research into. So I'm going to take many examples from Germany, but it's important to recognize that fascism isn't the same thing as Nazism. There are many other kinds of fascism as well. Now, one of the problems when you're talking about fascism is that there isn't one strict definition of fascism. I mean, almost everybody who writes about it would agree that it's something like an authoritarian, ultranationalist, political ideology and set of tools that really uses the politics of division, us versus them, and is steeped in the mythology of a mythical past. You know, we're going to get back to this wonderful time that there was before. But then you get into some nuances, and what I'm going to talk about today is working with Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, because he's got a checklist of 10 characteristics of fascism. And when I've talked about this with my friend Daniele Bolelli, it's not so much that you must have all 10 of these things. It's kind of like the Alcoholics Anonymous checklist for are you an alcoholic? You know, there's a list of 12 questions, and if you've answered yes to 4 or 5 of them, then you might have a problem with alcoholism. You know, as if you've got 10 items on your checklist, and you're checking off 1 or 2 of them, it might not be a good thing, but it's probably not fascism. But as you're getting up to 7, 8, 9, or 10 items on that checklist, you're getting very much more into fascistic country. So Jason Stanley's first characteristic or checkbox is the invocation of a mythic past. What does that mean? Well, let's go to Germany. It's noteworthy to remember that Hitler wasn't trying to create something new. He was trying to create the Third Reich. The First Reich being the era of Germany under the descendants of Charlemagne in the 800s and 900s. And this was this wonderful time that we have to get back to. The Second Reich was, Prussia at the height of its powers in the 1800s when they won the Franco-Prussian War. And of course, the Nazi regime would be the Third Reich. They were going to make Germany great again, just like it had been supposedly great in the First and in the Second Reich. They were going to make the Third Reich. If you take a look at Italian fascism, they're essentially trying to recreate, Mussolini was trying to recreate the Roman Empire. Let's get some colonies in Africa again. If you go to Rome and you take a look at the fascist era architecture, it's very explicitly Roman in style. They're trying to restore the glories of Rome. So part of the fascistic definition, and one of the biggest tools they have, is creating this mythical past when men were men and women were women, and basically we all spoke one language and we were all the same skin color, by the way. All of this is not true, but this is the myth that they're trying to create. They're trying to harken back to a previous time and make their country great again. The second of 10 characteristics is the very widespread use of propaganda, basically creating a state media apparatus and suppressing other alternate narratives. So, in the German era, there was the Völkischer Beobachter, the newspaper. And this was basically the mouthpiece of the Nazi Party. Other newspapers and other journalists were suppressed, and they were, there was just the one story being told. I would argue that Fox News and One America, they are essentially the modern Völkische Beobachter. And we haven't really gotten to heavy media suppression other than many, many, many threats of suing journalists, and even the threat of throwing people running social media companies who are allowing fact-checking into jail until they bend the knee and change their narrative and open themselves up to free speech, which translates as no fact-checking on our side of the story. One essential part of the propaganda narrative, according to Jason Stanley, is the attack on corruption. And we're going to drain the swamp. There's very, very similar language used in the 1930s by, Hitler, who wanted to drain the swamp of the corrupt politicians. Interestingly, corruption in this case is more corruption of the people rather than financial corruption. And of course, corruption ends up becoming a central part of fascist regimes because loyalty is so important, that loyalty above everything else, and you have to reward loyalty. Interestingly, you've heard of Mein Kampf, the book that Hitler wrote. I've read it. It's almost unreadable. When a couple got married in Nazi Germany, they were given a copy of Mein Kampf by the state. Very nice of the state. Nobody read it, but they were given it. The royalties for that book were given back to Hitler. Makes you think a little bit of the Oklahoma Trump Bible, doesn't it? Where Oklahoma put in a series of specifications for the Bibles that they wanted for their classrooms. And guess what? According to their specifications, there's only one Bible that you can get, the Trump Bible. The analogies here are really, really strong. It's very much a kickback system. And if you take a look at, on the first day of the Trump regime, them rescinding a previous executive order that made it much harder to bribe politicians, this is inevitably a road to corruption. So propaganda, we're draining the swamp, and corruption go hand in hand. The third pillar of fascism is anti-intellectualism. And it's been argued that this is because intellectualism, or the universities, or science, is actually pursuing truth. Doesn't always get it right, doesn't always get there right away, but there's a series of steps to take you closer to truth. But a fascistic regime wants to be in control of what truth is, and therefore it suppresses the other organs of the state that can argue with that narrative. So we've talked about how the propaganda arm of a fascistic regime suppresses other media organizations because they want to be in control of the narrative. Similarly, anti-intellectualism is a big part of it. Look at the speech that J.D. Vance gave, I want to say in 2021, called "The Universities Are the Enemy." A university, some universities are left, some universities are right, some university professors are Marxist, other university professors are socialists, some university professors are capitalists. It's a mix. It's amazing how certain people are that universities are hotbeds of Marxism, mostly by people who've never been to university. It's a very diverse place and gives you different ways of viewing the world. But the attack on the universities, the attack on research, I would argue the attack on science, shutting down massive amounts of science research, the invocation of conspiracy theory, the attack on vaccines, the attack on basic science. This is all part of the anti-intellectual movement that's happened under every fascistic regime, including the current one. I don't want to do too much reading from this book, but let me read you a little bit and see how these parts are beginning to tie together. Fascist politics, however, makes room for the study of myths as fact. In fascist ideology, the function of the education system is to glorify the mythic past, elevating the achievements of members of the nation and obscuring the perspectives and histories of those who do not belong. So by attacking the intellectual institutions, which study different things from different perspectives, We're trying to get to one narrative of the folk, of the people, and we're certainly going to suppress any other narratives that might conflict with that. The fourth checkbox is unreality, and this is making people uncertain about what the truth is, basically by flooding the zone with shit. To refer back to Steve Bannon, original Trump strategist, talking about how the media is the enemy. And the strategy here is to flood the zone with shit. It's not so much about convincing people of something, although that would be nice, but it's more to make them question everything. Man, I hear this. I hear that mRNA vaccines are going to cause cancer in everybody, turbo cancer, and I hear that mRNA vaccines are good, so, I should probably just not take any vaccine. So clearly, the middle ground, the prudent position is just to do nothing here. Yeah. So it's trying to create so much confusion that it's hard to take action. And the wild conspiracism comes into this here. I would argue that Pizzagate, this idea that Democratic politicians are abducting children and draining them of adrenochrome and doing terrible things to them in a pizza parlor in Washington, is very similar to the fake document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that were circulated in Nazi Germany as proof that the Jews were up to something no good. As an aside, you might want to argue that all sides need to be heard. And there is truth to that. However, we also have to acknowledge that bullshit travels much, much faster than truth, and it's much, much harder to refute bullshit because you can create an infinite stream of bullshit. In 10 seconds, I could stream so much bullshit that it would take you 2 hours to refute. As Mark Twain supposedly said, a lie can spread halfway around the world before the truth has even had a chance to put its shoes on. The fifth pillar is a very strong sense of hierarchy, that some people are just better than other people. So billionaires above millionaires, above people like you and me. White people above brown people, above black people. Men above women. There's a very, very strong sense that there's a natural order to things, and some people are more deserving, and other people deserve nothing at all. Let me just read something because it ties in very nicely with the next point. Hierarchy benefits fascist politics in another way. Those who are accustomed to its benefits can be easily led to view liberal equality as a source of victimization. That's because people who see themselves higher up on a hierarchy, when they begin to slip off that, then they're the victims. Their natural position is up here, but they're beginning to slip, so it has to be somebody else's fault. They are the victims here. Jason Stanley also makes the point that empires in decline are particularly vulnerable to this, because as they fall down, as the standard of living goes down, as living becomes harder, you have to try to find a reason that you aren't at the top of the hierarchy anymore. And again, that's blaming somebody else. It creates an anger and it creates a resentment that can then be mobilized to the advantage of fascist politicians and to the disadvantage of everybody else. The sixth pillar is victimization, the spreading of the idea that you, my loyal followers, are actually victims here, and I am your retribution. I will make it right. If you take a look at Hitler's rise to power, the victim card was incredibly powerful here. Germany, the story went, was winning World War I. We were winning. And then the November criminals stabbed us in the back. The people back home, the Jews, the communists, they undermined us. We were about to win, and we got stabbed in the back. Yes, you brave, brave German soldiers. It's not your fault. You are the victims here. Furthermore, you're being oppressed by all the other powers, and there's actually some truth there. I mean, Germany was pretty destroyed by the reparations, but really using that victim card to try and get everyone enraged and everyone supporting the fascist movement. So when you take a look at modern situations, you have to take a look at who's playing the victim. Somebody that I met, I can't give it away, who had a really good job, was busy telling me that the white Christian male was pretty much the hardest put upon member of society. The white Christian male really was the most beleaguered, the most oppressed member of society. And I looked around at his really good job, and it was mostly full of white Christian males. But he bought into this victim narrative. Help, help, I'm being oppressed. So when you have a declining standard of living, and it's getting harder to pay the bills and make ends meet, then it's a very convenient narrative to say, well, it's because of the immigrants, or it's because of these people here. It's because of the woke soy libtards. It's not your fault that you graduated only grade 12 and never did any post-secondary and don't have as good a job as your dad. It's the immigrants. It's not your fault that you can't get a girlfriend. It's the feminists who are poisoning the mind of all the women who might be interested in you and your red hat. The seventh checkbox is a fascination and an emphasis with and lip service to law and order. Law and order. We are the law and order candidates. Except, of course, when the law stands in our way. Then the law is standing in the way of law and order. But we are still law and order. And in the pursuit of law and order, laws and order start getting eroded. As long as you're wrapping yourself in the cloak of law and order, you can get away with an awful lot of stuff. We're first going to expel criminal aliens, and then we're going to expel people who we don't like because they're saying the wrong things. It's like the classic quote, first they came for the communists, but I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists. Then they came for the trade unionists. Then they came for the Jews. And then finally they come for you. So it's this long, slippery slope of erosion of, basic civil protections. First by attacking the outside people, right? You're in support of Venezuelan drug lords? Well, no, I'm in support of due process. You say he's a Venezuelan drug lord. Well, let's first actually give this person some due process that we can all see. Not just you've declared them to be a Venezuelan drug lord. You've declared them to be a communist. You've declared them to be a socialist. You've declared them to be a trade unionist. You've declared them to be a Jew. Now, Jason Stanley talks about the utility of the term criminal and how you can use the term criminal to get away with an awful lot in the name of law and order. I would suggest that since 9/11, we should also include the term terrorist there. I mean, if you invoke the term terrorist, we have information that this person's a terrorist. Okay, well, you can do whatever you want with them then in the name of law and order. I mean, Guantanamo, we don't like terrorists. Send them to Guantanamo. Terrorist? Well, just have ICE come and lock them up and send them to a prison in El Salvador. You're not in support of terrorists, are you? Terrorist becomes the magic word to get rid of people that you don't like as well. The eighth checkbox, the eighth factor that if you add it in, it's beginning to look an awful lot like fascism, is sexual anxiety. In the 1920s and 1930s, there was a great deal of sexual anxiety in Germany about this idea that the Jews wanted to use the Africans to despoil the purity of the Aryan race. They were going to send the blacks in to rape all the German women and create these mulatto, impure, diluted German blood people. For example, during the occupation of the Rhineland, the French, who were occupying the Rhineland, ended up using some colonial troops from their colonies in Africa, who were black. And this created a massive fear and uproar and indignation in the German propaganda machine. Basically, they want those blacks to come and attack your women. It's kind of similar now to the freaking out about trans women. They're going to be raping everybody in those bathrooms there. Well, the analyses that have been done looking at the number of sexual assaults that happen, comparing, trans women and drag queens to youth pastors. Youth pastors are not coming off on the better side of that. It's 1,000 to 1 youth pastors attacking kids as opposed to drag queens. Another part of sexual anxiety is the idea that women have too much power and that things like birth control give women too much power to decide what they're going to do instead of the good traditional roles of wife and daughter and mother. So, it's these uppity women are getting too big for their britches, and we're going to take away abortion. And then we're going to come for birth control. And then we're going to put in 1,000 other little levers that keep them in the home. in their good traditional roles. Just to go back to not everything that I dislike is fascism, I'm not a fan of Bolshevism and Stalinism. Those were shitty, terrible, awful ideologies, ranking up there with Nazism. But, you know, it's interesting to say that the Stalinists and the Bolsheviks, which were authoritarian but not fascist, were putting women into the front lines during World War II. They had women snipers, they had women pilots, they had women soldiers. Whereas the Germans, right to the very end, did not put women in combat roles. I mean, literally, the Russians were in Berlin, and they're attacking the Fuhrer bunker, and the women still weren't fighting. So it's reflective of the sexual anxiety around giving women too much power, and the traditional roles of men here and women here, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Point number 9 is the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, the idea that cities are these cesspits of evil, and that really the heart of the people is in the country, in the little villages, in the simple rural life where a white father and a white mother raise white children doing country stuff. I'm just speculating here, but maybe this is in part because of the disparity in education between people who live in the cities and people who live in the country. We know that people who live in the cities tend to be more educated than people who live in the country. And we also know that as people become more educated, their politics tend to go more to the center and more to the left and less to the far right. So by targeting the country and upholding the values of the countryside, you're upholding the values which are congruent with other aspects we've talked about, like anti-intellectualism. Cities also tend to be more diverse, with greater numbers of colors of people, greater numbers of culture, all packed in together. Whereas the countryside, this mythical rural country, tends to be more of a monoculture, usually, in our example, white. So then you end up with the demonization and the vilification of cities. Look at the out-of-control crime rates in New York City. Well, if you take a look at the crime rate per capita in New York City, it's actually a pretty safe place to be. And rural Kentucky and rural Alabama, those are pretty dangerous places to be per capita. But it doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter as long as you control the apparatus of propaganda, and you can convince people that they're putting their lives at risk if they venture into the big city with all the blacks and the browns and everyone committing violent crime. And statistically, it's just not true in most cases. Ominously, the 10th and final pillar that Jason Stanley lays out is Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. Infamously, these were the words above the gate that went into Auschwitz, the concentration and death camp. Of division, us versus them, we are portrayed as hardworking, and they are portrayed as lazy. Those lazy immigrants, just being given money and being given everything. Well, there's a reason that immigrants are so strongly represented in the agricultural production area, especially the hardest parts of that work, because it sucks. And I guarantee you, if you go work on a farm for a couple of days, picking avocados or picking blueberries, you will understand that that is in fact incredibly hard work. Jason Stanley also talks about the policies that exist to take stereotypes and reinforce them. One example of this would be the differential application of drug laws, white people versus black people. Something like 1 in 3 black males end up in prison. Something like 1 in 17 white males end up in prison. Why? Well, a lot of this has to do with the drug laws, right? If you're a white college kid getting busted with a joint 10 years ago, or in a place where that's still illegal, then you probably are not going to get charged, and you're probably not going to go to jail. But if you're black, okay, here's your first strike. Good luck. 2 more strikes and you are out. And now you've got a criminal record. And now good luck getting a job with it. So by using things like criminal sentences that are differentially enforced between white and black people, and then making it much harder to get a good job if you have a criminal sentence, you are continuing the stereotype that you're trying to promote, which is that black people are lazy and black people don't work. Some of that, at least, is maybe black people can't work because you've managed to give them a criminal record. To go back to the 1930s, there were a whole lot of laws stopping Jews from working in certain professions. And now you can, of course, promulgate the story that Jews are lazy. Look, they're not working. Fascist governments also hate trade unions. They hate anything that tries to make the workplace more egalitarian. And certainly Hitler arrested and imprisoned and murdered trade unionists. And in the modern era, that hasn't happened yet. But look at the promotion and the spreading of the right to work legislation in Republican states. And it's going to be coming at the federal government as well. Right to work is a brilliantly termed thing where, of course, you have the right to work. Translation, joining a union is optional. If you're in a unionized workplace, you don't have to pay union dues. You have a right to work regardless of whether you pay union dues. The union still has to represent you, of course, but you don't have to pay to be a member of the union. This just guts union power completely. Using a brilliant marketing slogan, the right to work, it just destroys the power of unions, any kind of collective bargaining, and allows your wages and your benefits to plummet. The organization of the workplace into a strict hierarchy is, of course, congruent with the earlier emphasis on hierarchy. You must do this regardless of whether it's safe or an intelligent thing to do. Something like a union allows you to push back against these kinds of unsafe work conditions, for example, and disrupts the hierarchy. So that is an assault upon the fascist sense that hierarchy is the natural order of things. And ultimately, this is expressed by the hero worship of people like Elon Musk. The dude is a billionaire. Therefore, he must be better than the rest of us. Therefore, he must be smarter than the rest of us. And therefore, he knows what's good for us. It's, again, hierarchy and this idea of an unrestricted workplace with no benefits for the worker, really. Those two things working hand in hand. So just to review, we've got the mythic past, we've got the extensive use of propaganda, and anti-intellectualism, unreality, hierarchy, strong sense of victimhood, and emphasis, at least in word, and maybe not in deed, on law and order, sexual anxiety, Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a hatred of cities, and Arbeit macht frei, the idea that work will set you free, but also that work should be unfettered by any kind of regulation or protection for the workers. So I would recommend that you read How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley. And if there's ever been a case of a canary in a coal mine, Jason Stanley recently fled the United States with his family to move to another country because he was worried of how the United States was progressing politically.